I am Lila Lieberman. I come from South Africa and have been on the path of plants and plant medicines and Indigenous cultures and working with them for many years. And when I came back from traveling in South America when I was 18, I met a bunch of Indigenous healers there in South Africa called Sangoma, who told me I had a calling and needed to train. So while that was overwhelming at the time, and I was hesitant to train for a long time, eventually, maybe 12 years later, I did go through an initiation. And from that, a lot of things started to open and really blossom in my being, which is interesting because the word for initiation in South Africa is twasa, and it literally translates into to blossom. So I've experienced a massive blossoming in my life since undergoing that. And what I'll be speaking to largely is around initiation, what it is, what it affords us, what a culture looks like when we don't have rites of passage and initiation, and how plants are like midwives for us as we open and blossom our being, how different plants perform different activities, and how it's all relevant now. You know, as above, so below. We're as the individual needs to undergo rites of passage and initiations to blossom, so does a culture, so does a civilization. So we're in a massive initiation right now, and I'll get to that as best I can.
Welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Great. So thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you for having me. And just to take a moment to express gratitude to everything that has taught me and shown me in my life. And that includes people and teachers and the people who initiated me. And of course, the plants and the land and the creatures. Really just acknowledging that it's the information, the knowledge, the wisdom that they've shared with me that comes through me now. So it comes through me, not from me, that I have to share. And I'm very grateful and honored to be here sharing this with you. So I want to speak a little bit at first about initiation and what it is. And I see it like a sacred geometry along a lifeline. Everything in nature, everything in the cosmos has a natural rhythm and natural sacred geometry and the timing of it. Everything unfurls naturally in its own way. So traditionally in all cultures, we would put rites of passage at certain nodes along our lifespan. And it literally does follow the golden mean, like the golden mean starts 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. And some are more obvious than others, but these are the relevant ages at which to put initiation, almost to prune the nodes and the buddingness of our being at those times. So what it does, what initiation does, is that it moves, it's a movement from one state of being to a more expanded state of being. And it's in fact like a pattern interrupt. So something changes. We have a rite of passage acknowledging that we're mourning and leaving go of one part of our lives and moving into another phase in the next part of our lives. So moving from childhood and mourning and letting all of that go into adulthood and all the responsibilities that that holds, or moving from singlehood into partnership and marriage, or moving from being a person in the community to being a medicine person. All kinds of initiations instruct our being that we're now operating in our community in a different way. So it interrupts the previous patterns, and particularly when we have a medicinal calling and want to initiate or feel called to initiate to a more medicinal practice, it's a pattern interrupt that, if managed well, it leaves the being in a more heightened state of patterning. So it ignites and activates more multidimensional aspects of our being and allows us to see on different levels and hear on different levels and utilize that, shepherd those tendencies to be medicinal for our community. So largely it is challenging medicine, and it's there to interrupt old patterns of behavior and allow us to upgrade new software and reboot ourselves so we can be of higher contribution and offering to our community. And what it also does is that it stimulates the immune system of our being. So it makes us more resilient on all levels. It makes us more resilient, not only physically, but on more energetic levels as well. And it always happens at the crossroads. We always come to an intersection, to a crossroads, to a challenge where we have to choose how to move forward, and we have to navigate carefully. So when we enter initiation, we want to have midwives around us that have, like, harness us over that threshold. Of course, in a culture like ours, we've largely burnt this knowledge and this wisdom at the stake, but a lot of us are finding our ways back to intuitively pulling on the traditions that are holding these wisdoms and finding our way slowly. Of course, we also have a lot of trauma around it. Like someone might have a calling. We exist in a culture that doesn't know how to interpret that. So they might be diagnosed with some kind of psychosis. Meanwhile, it's actually a calling. So when we have a calling sickness, as it's called in South Africa, it literally is like a sickness. It'll either be physiological or psychological or circumstantial, but there'll be some challenge, some crossroads, some impediment in our path that forces us to seek healing. It forces us to seek remedy. So traditionally, in a traditional culture, we would go to a healer to get reflection on what's going on. And hopefully that healer will recognize it's not an illness, it's a calling, and train us up adequately. So we have those midwives that midwife us over the threshold of our growth, of our evolution, of our being. And of course, like any movement into newness, it's a period of disorientation while our being reorganizes itself. So we don't want to be, but we find ourselves once again vulnerable, raw, disorientated, in the unknown, in terra incognito, like a child again. And this is actually a really useful technology to allow us to be an accessible platform for new data to come into our being. So what initiation does is it builds resilience in the chalice of our being, the sacred chalice of our being, and makes it more tough so that we can receive a higher and higher caliber of nectar in that chalice. And of course, plants, being beings that have evolved alongside us for millennia, we use them. We use them. They're part of our midwifery. They're part of our midwives, and we use them to fortify our field and to bring us insight and guidance at the time and to keep our center. And so they are like medicine that midwives us into becoming medicine ourselves. So, as above, so below. And just with a person, as I was saying at the beginning, just as a person has rites of passage along a sacred timing of the life to get us to blossom and bring us into our fullest capacity, so is true of a culture and a civilization. And we need to go as a culture through these rites of passage. Now, we don't formally have them in our culture, which is why they're coming in the form of crises and disasters, but they are initiations and they are rites of passage. So right now we're going through quite a powerful global initiation, and it's showing, albeit through crisis, albeit through trauma, it's showing a readiness and a need for us to move into another state of being. We are overdue, we are more than ripe, and so nature is blossoming through us. It's bringing about a non-negotiable evolution of our being. So we are in the midst of a massive reordering of our culture, of ourselves, of our being. And because we have no structure to appeal to within our culture, we have no language that will midwife us and hold a sacred container while we go through this birthing canal, we need to appeal to the mythic realms. We need to appeal to the more ancient teachers all around us. When we're in initiation, as an individual, we have a teacher who's gone through it before, who's seen it all before, and knows exactly how to take our hand and lead us over the threshold. Now, as a culture, we need to appeal again to a teacher beyond ourselves, an older, wiser, more expansive knowingness to guide us over this threshold. So what that is nature itself. It's the waters, it's the plants, it's the air and the clouds and the sun. And this is what is holding all these ancient timeless codes that will reboot us and bring us back to the inherent alignment of our being and help us midwife through. So we need to learn to entrain ourselves to the natural world. We need to learn to recognize what the timeless teachers are around us and essentially replicate the divine, mirror these timeless rhythms that are all around us, and replicate the divine patterns that are our birthright. So it is also important to acknowledge that we live in a culture that has a low tolerance for disruption and for change and for discomfort and for essentially for initiation. We have a low tolerance and a lack of familiarity with these processes. So just in acknowledging where we are and acknowledging our lostness, this brings us a lot more into presence, because if we're going to move from anywhere, we need to get honest with where we are. And what moves us what truly moves us in our being always comes from what's hidden. So what seems to be said very suddenly has lived a long time as a story in the body. So what seems to have erupted very suddenly on the surface of our culture has actually been brewing like a story for a long time. So we need to find our way, and we need to take guidance from these deep and natural rhythms and the world, because there is much invisible help to be had. So inherently, when I speak about these timeless codings and this natural rhythm that we're attuned to, just like everything in nature, we are designed for this flowering and for this evolution. You know, in the same way that a flower just knows when is the right time to come out of the bud and open petal by petal, or a woman's body knows for the hips when they should move open when she's in labor and giving birth. Our being inherently knows when is the right time for us to flower. So usually, like I said, we've got this midwifery process of rites of passage along the timeline of our life to help us flower, to help us prune ourselves so that we can harness all the nutrients from our roots and really pull this up through our stem and blossom and fruit and flower into the world. And it is a trauma that we find ourselves in a culture that doesn't have this reference, but nonetheless, we have this timeless coding. We have this process that is going to be flowering through us anyway. So essentially, we are designed for initiation. We are designed to flower and flourish and bud and bloom in our being. And this means come to higher and higher levels of perception and levels of being able to see and heal and interpret and engage with the cosmos as a whole. So our very cellular memory holds the storyline of where we are in the place of things. And when we hold ourselves with these rites of passage, it allows us to blossom our specific gifts. It allows us to truly harness the gifts that we're holding inside ourselves and have a platform and a container and like an amnion, a birthing basket through which the amniotic fluid falls into when a baby is born. So when we have a culture or a sacred process to midwife us through this, our specific gifts can really begin to come through a portal and allow us to become the medicine ourselves. So I'll focus a lot in this talk on the use of plants as allies, as teachers in this process. But I also want to look at the role of ceremony. What is ceremony? So what it is really is a concentrated portal of attention and a portal of time where we focus and bring the whole of ourselves into that moment across all time, space, level, dimension, and plane, all our ancestors, everything we might have been in past lives, into that moment. It's like stepping into the cockpit of our being and realigning the dials and the switches and then putting it once again into autopilot so our life takes on a particular direction. But we are the ones that ceremonially step into that space and set those settings, give that instruction. So we create this container for our own evolution with ceremony. Ceremony is the container that holds a good feel for us. And plants help us fortify, they help us access different states of being. They put things into hyperspeed or elevated attention to allow us to fully midwife through. So they are a huge part of our midwifery and our birthing in these regards. So essentially what it is to come into a space of initiation, to midwife well into the world, is to harness simple knowledge. The simple knowledge that's all around us, like I said, in the fire, in the air, in the waters, in the earth, in the plants, everything is holding this very simple knowledge. But in the simple knowledge are embedded octaves of symbolism and octaves of meaning. So going through initiation allows our attention to expand, and it amplifies our capacity to harness the simple knowledge, to see the octaves of relevance in every small thing, and to be able to read the world. So we look at how each element is in fact deeply symbolic, what fire truly is, like a portal between worlds, the ash showing us when we're in a slightly altered space, we can see all the images in the ash. And this is communicating to us the nature of what's going on in the underworld. And then we can make offerings and communicate into that underworld by offering things to the fire. And we can offer either plants and leaves to carry our prayers up, and the smoke links us with the upper world. And the nature of the smoke tells us how it's being received. So not only is fire as we see it, but it's literally a portal of seeing between worlds. It enlightens us, it illuminates us as to what's going on in the three worlds, the underworld, the middle world, and the upper world. So it allows us to be able to read the world, almost like track what's going on all around us, because all the information is held in this very simple information, on the very simple elements that are surrounding us all the time. So it shows us how each element is in fact deeply symbolic, and it refers to the principles functioning inside of everything. It allows us to see the big inside the small and the small inside the big. So therefore it allows us to see, to be an oracle, to be able to read what's going on in the cosmos as we throw an oracle of coca leaves or throw the bones as we do in Africa, and be able to tell what's going on in the greater field simply by looking at the microcosm. So heightening our intelligence and heightening our awareness, heightening our perceptiveness is part of initiation that allows us to see everything in the most simple knowledge. It allows us to read the rhythms of the world and mirror the cycles of the cosmos. Of course, the seasons are an obvious one, but there's cosmic cycles going on all around us, and to be able to tell where we are in the rhythm of that song and that dance lets us know what's coming next. So the same way you'll be listening to a song, even if you've only heard it for the first time, and you're getting familiar with it, and there comes the chorus, and now it's that rhythm, and you start to get familiar with what's coming next because you knew what came before. So in reading the world and the simple ingredients of the world, we can also start to acclimatize ourselves and be able to read it, like feel the pulse of the world and know what's coming next by virtue of how perceptive we were in seeing what came before. So it allows us to hear the greater rhythm of the cosmos, really, and cultivate a knowing, because all the energy around us and all the microbial colonies on the surface of all the plants and woods and everything around us is holding this ancient body of wisdom that's stored there. So when we know how to utilize the plants in different ways, as I'll speak about soon, we know how to take this ancient timeless knowledge in with the midwifery of the microbes, which is a whole beautiful other conversation about the power of fermentation, how those ancient colonies and cultures hold ancient knowledge and then transfer that to us via digestion in our gut. So essentially, taking the simple knowledge allows us to be able to dance well within the world and dance well between the worlds. And this allows us to be like a living bridge of wisdom between the worlds and also between people, because as we cultivate our knowing, we're able to share that. So we become not only useful to our community, but like a living bridge of wisdom that then passes it on. We become part of the river, part of the channel. And it allows us to be and bring in really good medicine. So initiation essentially allows us to tap into and activate the different octaves of our being. And it's like I said before, it's like a software upgrade, and it allows our perception and our reading of the world to expand. It allows us to read the harmonics in simple things, to hear the octaves in the music of nature and see it's not just a fire, it's actually a communication between worlds, or it's not just clouds, it's actually carrying a patterning of the wind and the song of what's going on in the upper realms, and all that water that contains memory and information is like a massive file transfer that's going from one part of the globe to the other. So being able to see much deeper into what's already there is what initiation allows. It allows our seeing to deepen and allows our seeing to, or our perception to span a wider continuum of being from the gross to the subtle. And in so doing, it lets us be multilingual. It lets us navigate between the worlds. It lets us know how to negotiate what is currency between the worlds of matter and spirit. And in so doing, it allows us to be good midwives between worlds and good negotiators in balancing the elements and keeping good harmony between the realms, which makes us then good medicine. Because as humans, one of our fundamental roles is keeping this beautiful balance, is keeping and tending and shepherding through ceremony, through tending the soil and the gardens, through knowing when to make the right offerings and call the rains. It's tending and shepherding a good rhythm on the planet. That is our role, like guardians on the surface of the planet. So when we go into initiation, when we start to work in this way, it seems to the untrained eye that we're working behind the world. because our attention is constellated. The way we see the world is constellated, and largely we inherit this constellation through our cultural paradigm. So when we have an initiation, even if it's in the form of a spontaneous shock or grief or anything that suddenly changes our context in the world, it reconstellates our perception and it rearranges how we see the world. Now, initiation does this intentionally. It takes the contents of our minds, of how we perceive things, and it rearranges them. So now we not only have the new upgraded way of seeing, we also have reference to how we were seeing before, which is how the majority of our culture might be seeing. If we've been chosen to be the midwife between worlds, or the one who can see and understand dreams, then we are the one who's the translator and the interpreter, and thereby can make deals and ceremonies and offer what we need to bring balance in the lives of ourselves or our community or our clients or the greater harmonic constellation of the world around us. So, as I said, first, of course, it happens within an order. There's a very intelligent order, just like the blossoming of our being and the sacred nodes along the golden mean timing of our life. Initiation follows this pattern in a very intentional way. So the first thing is that we come into some kind of disorientation, some kind of unwellness that sends us to a healer. And there's a real important technology in stepping into this unknown, in stepping into this disorientation. It allows us to be vulnerable, raw, exposed, and really open to the world so that we can begin to hear more and see more, because our nervous system is now more attuned. And it also allows us in this very humbling process to become more compassionate for all life forms. So it sets up a pathway in our perceptual abilities and our perceptual capacities that allows us to be more nimble in shifting between the worlds, because now we're multilingual. So, like I say, to the untrained eye, it looks like we're working behind the world because we're weaving in elements from the unseen. But they're in fact subtle elements that were always there all along. And we're weaving in those unseen elements into the seen world and offering seen things into the unseen world again. So it expands our attention to include the more subtle elements and allows us to be more adept. So one thing I could make an analogy about when I speak about initiation is like all of us are driving a car, and at night we've got our lights on and we're driving along and we can see so far. But what initiation allows us to do is turn the brights on. We can just see that little bit further. We can just see a little bit ahead and then learn to navigate more skillfully, given that we can see that little bit extra. So there's an order, of course, in which this happens, as I mentioned. And that disorientation, that calling sickness, that unknown that sends us to seek healing and sends us to seek centering and realigning is the first thing that happens. And once we begin to enter that process of acknowledging this is what's going on and we have a calling and we want to train, we start to undergo a process of first purification, first cleansing and emptying ourselves, opening ourselves up so that we're able to receive and be accessible to the beings that wish to work with us and that wish to guide us and help us. So at this point, we're working a lot with white plants. We're working with plants that are literally white roots, white bark, white leaves. They're there to heal us and cleanse us and open our being and scrub us and humble us and really bring about white. Often we put it on our skin. In Australia, I've seen it a lot. In Africa, we do it a lot because it's the color of spirit. We're in that nebulous realm, that liminal realm between the worlds. We're in the realm of spirit. So we're using a lot of white things, and that opens our receptivity and our capacity to hear our ancestors, to be able to hear our dreams and understand what they're saying. And we empty our vessel. We empty our vessel so that we prepare it to receive well the nectar that wants to then be poured in, nectar of a higher frequency than what we were carrying before. So white plants, white clothing, white beads, white ochre, white clay on ourselves, because this is the color of cleansing and the color of rebirth and being in the realm of spirit. So these are the appropriate plants to use at this stage because they cleanse us and they open our being. And they help us move through this very tenuous terra incognita, and they let us become clearer and ground and calm. And of course, the one plant that travels with us all through in many different cultures we see is tobacco. We use tobacco right from the beginning all the way through initiation and all through our lifetimes, in fact, because this is a plant that is there not only to cleanse us, and to ground us, but it also gives us courage, and it gives us good guidance and good alignment, and it's a huge protector. So as we're moving through these nebulous realms and these unknown territories, if we have the friendship and the allegiance and the guardianship of tobacco, we are going to have a really good ally in that. So we're using the white plants a lot to make us more receptive to the messages of spirit. It allows us to be more porous and to humble ourselves and to hear more clearly the things that are wanting to communicate with us. So humility, grounding, coming to ground, coming to soil, coming to earth is a huge technology that's used in all initiations at the beginning of any significant rite of passage. So it's not just a lovely quality to have, it's actually a wisdom technology that allows our being to be emptied, to be hollowed, to be scrubbed clean, to be close to the earth, to be on our knees, and to be open to become the receptacle and the antenna that we are. So as we cleanse ourselves and take out all interruption, not eating certain things and going through abstinence from intimate encounters and abstinence from certain kinds of food and sleep deprivation, all ways of opening and cleansing our being, so we begin to realize that we are an antenna that can tune into different realms of being and receive information as well as transmit valuable information. So a huge part of the beginning of initiation, particularly in Africa, which is where I train in South Africa, is humility. And it led me to go on a search for the root, the etymology of the word humility and how it's related to the word human. So the original word for human was chem. You can see it on the screen now, and I don't know exactly how to pronounce it, but it's got the hem in it. And this is an Indo-European word that means soil. And from that came the word humus, which means soil, humus on the earth. And then humilis, which is like to be of the earth, to be lowly, to be small, to be without elevation. And then humility, to be close to the soil, to be low and nice and not elevated above others. And then from that came humble, and from that came human. So essentially the root of the word human comes from the word for soil, for the ground, for the earth. So at the beginning of initiation in Africa, it's traditional for us through our entire training to stay on our knees, to not only be small, like a child again, in newness, in humility and close to the earth, but also to literally spend a lot of time with our tantien, our umbilical, our belly, much closer to the earth than it usually is. And over the months that we're in training, there becomes our umbilical cord reorientates, our energetic umbilical cord reorientates to take instruction from the earth itself. So by the time that we graduate and by the time that we move through this passage, we're taking guidance from the earth wisdom of this beautiful planet that we're on herself. And interesting, the word culture also comes from soil. The word culture comes from the Latin cultura, which means to tend the soil, and agri is a field. So the word human comes from the word soil, and culture comes from the purpose of tending the soil. So it's a very humbling and very indicative and instructive understanding of what our role is on the planet, to tend the soil, to care for the protective layer of the earth, keep things going well, tend the gardens, make sure the soil is in good alignment, everything it needs, learning how to nourish and enrich the soil, because as is the soil, so is in our body. The microbes and bacterial colonies that we find in the soil are the very same ones that we'll find in our gut. And we know that we receive all our instruction and hormones and serotonin and dopamine, 80% of it comes from the gut. So as is the quality and nature of the soil, so is the quality of our consciousness, because we are what we eat. So we take in this intelligence and interpret it and emulate it through our lives. So preparing the vessel, once we've opened and humbled ourselves, we start to prepare the vessel of our being to be able to hold this higher and higher caliber of knowledge, of nectar that we bring into ourselves through initiation. And there's 4 common qualities that I found across many cultures: abstinence from intimate engagement and from certain social interactions that are not ceremonial, isolation, so going away from the culture, going away from the commune, from the community for a time of being. And this gives time for our being to become aligned to another realm of listening and hearing, or the realm of dreams and spirits and ancestors. And like I said, the umbilical planted in the earth. So this isolation allows us to not be distracted as we reattune and reorganize our being to a higher frequency of operating. And there's often a death and rebirth emulation, which is more often than not entheogenic. And we go through a passage of letting go of everything we knew before and having a rebirth. And this is manifested and reenacted in many ways in different kinds of initiations. And then there's the invocation, calling forward what we want, calling forward the guides we want to work with, the ancestors, giving them nourishment so that they become alive again and know that we're giving them our attention so they can start to communicate with us because we're listening. So it really makes our being available to what wants to engage us, to a bigger, wider world of spirit, and give it our undivided attention that we may be this throughway, this channel to midwife information between spirit and matter. So it takes out all distraction and allows us to align ourselves deeply with that which we want to work with. So I found I could boil it down to four main things, four main technologies or sacred technologies, simple sacred technologies that align us in our being when we're going through initiation, and that we can call upon at any point in our lives. And that is dance, chants, trance, and plants. So dance, of course, we get into a rhythm. We are listening to the music and we're going through this repetitive rhythm, which essentially hypnotizes our attention. And it hypnotizes our default daily attention so that the rest of us is then available to be rebooted in the way Spirit wants to reboot us. So all of these really simple technologies, repetition, rhythm, song, sleep deprivation, they take us into sacred states, and they take us into states with a mystical purpose. So we use chants, we use song, we use mantra, we use a way of directing our vocal intention, and we use trance, moving into altered states of being to see the world in a new way, to take the ingredients of our consciousness and move them around like a kaleidoscope to see the world, the same ingredients, in a new way. And of course, plants are these midwives that are open to inspiring us with knowledge and guiding us, cleansing us, protecting us, infusing us with all kinds of different medicines. So in a nutshell, I just thought it was charming to find these four elements that inherently we can boil down to are the four simple sacred technologies that help us to fixate our daily attention and hypnotize our daily attention in one way so that the rest of us is then free to go off into a new realm and become realigned in a more heightened way. You know, essentially the earth, when we're speaking about plants, earth grows things so that we can understand her better. She grows things to make an umbilical cord of meeting between her and us. So these things, be they plants, mineral, fungi, creatures, they're also curious about us. It's not just one way. It's not like we take the plants and we have an experience. It's a meeting of two beings or many beings inside the apothecary or the laboratory of our human body. So we engage them in this mutual meeting and we start to see the world through each other's eyes, and thereby creating this collaboration and meeting of worlds and coming to an understanding and moving forward in an upgraded, more harmonic way thereafter. So the purpose of these rites is that they midwife us into this heightened states of being, and we become the medicine ourselves, so that eventually we don't need to rely on using other things to be the medicine. They're simply the midwives that remind us who we are, and then hopefully we remain in that state of heightened being and medicine and permanently enter into an expanded state of seeing, because this is our blossoming, this is our organic birthright. So now we start to look at plants and the magical alliances that we have in plants. And a lot of the medicines, each of the medicines have a different role to play at different phases in our process. And when we combine these elements together, like we saw of dance and chants and plants, we start to activate our own technology in particular ways. Now, when we've gone through this process of humbling ourselves, opening ourselves, cleansing ourselves, listening to our ancestors, listening to our dreams, taking heed of the guidance that's coming through in these realms and enacting it. So exercising that muscle of taking seriously a dream or taking seriously an ancestral communication, we strengthen a certain muscle and we start to let go of and dissolve a previous limiting idea of who we thought we were. So once we have sufficiently humbled ourselves and cleansed ourselves and opened our beings, then that was with the white plants. Then we are ready to start receiving plants of more power. So in Africa, traditionally, these are known as the red plants that literally are of more richer color. And these plants have more magical capacities. They have more empowering capacities. So only once we are safely humbled and elegantly connected with the entire cosmos in our being, only then is it wise to give that being power and to teach that being how to open the seeing through various plants and dances and moving into expanded states that show us how to do that. So when we've dissolved our limited sense of self by many months on our knees and being of service to the community and being humbled and opening the plants and listening deeply to every bit of communication that's coming towards us through the world and being of service to that, then we start to gain more power and more powerful plants, so that we're acting on behalf of all those beings. We're acting with the voice of the ancestors going forward, with the power that we now gain from the new, more intense and more empowering plants that we encounter further on in our initiation. So as we start to get these rhythms and ancient pathways in ourselves humming within us, then we begin to ignite this ancient knowledge and tap into bodies of wisdom that are lying there dormant within us. And there's a beautiful term I've discovered in Tibetan Buddhism that's called terma. In Sanskrit, it's called a terma, which literally translates into a hidden gem, which is embedded in the plasma of consciousness, waiting there, lying in wait for when the initiate is ready. And this is something I feel I experienced through going through an initiation, because soon after I closed that, soon after we did the final closing ceremony, I started to very gently receive a body of knowledge in 5 branches that came through like the fruit of the being, like the fruit of my being that was harvested because I tended the garden of myself well by going through initiation. So then it was in the capacity to be able to flower and fruit. So once we go through initiation, whether it's spontaneous through some kind of shock or through formal initiation, because even in a culture like ours that doesn't have sacred rites of passage, there's still a lot of people that have awakened and ignited amazing gifts that we can call through initiatory passages. So we're all budding with our gifts because we were pruned by this perturbation, this disturbance, this radical change technology that I call initiation. So when we're ready to contain, when we've tuned our container and toned our container nicely, then we're ready to birth things through it. And I'll share just a little bit of one of the first body of knowledge that came through to me straight after my initiation, called the Cedar Teachings. And this was a body given to me by the cedar tree directly. I had some in my mom's garden and they started communicating with me. And what they shared with me is that different parts of the plant play different medicinal roles. And that makes sense as to why different plants and different parts of the plants will have different relevance at certain points in your journey. So what the cedar tree said to me, or what it transmitted to me that felt like thought, but the transmission was so lucid and clear, it couldn't possibly have been something I had thought about. It said to me that the spirit of a plant lives in the sap. I had found some resin as I came home, and I knew that the leaves of the plant, the needles, are a very powerful smudge. They're used for prayer, they're used for cleansing, they're incredibly powerful. But as I encountered this tree and gave it a hug, came to my mom's house, it left a little bit of resin on my sleeve. And I hadn't thought before, what does a different part of the same plant do? So I took this resin, I put it on some coals, I went outside beneath the trees and I started to wait for the smoke to waft up. And as it did, and it enveloped me and enveloped the trees, I noticed that not only was it exquisitely beautiful and ancient and feminine, this gorgeous smell I could have never imagined, it was also intelligent and intentional. It was making a conscious connection with me. So into that space, now that I'm acknowledging that I'm having this direct communion, this direct communication with the tree, it says to me, the spirit of the plant lives in the sap. And then it continued to say, medicine is in the bark, power is in the leaves, connection is in the roots, and love is in the fruit. So it said to me, I'm going to give you some entheogenic examples to make this really obvious to you. But this truth is in fact the same across all plants. So for example, that's why peyote and San Pedro is pure spirit. It's like a coming back to essence. It's a stillness medicine because it's just the sap. It's just the fluid of the plant. It's pure essence. And ayahuasca is power spirit medicine because it's the leaves, it's the bark, and there's the sap inside the vine. Mycelium, pure connectivity, and we literally mimicked our internet on the functioning of mycelium and mushrooms. Iboga is root bark, so it's connectivity medicine. And the example it gave for love is marijuana because it's the flower, and it showed me how the same is true of coffee or chocolate, where we have an opening and then it comes down. It's like a sugar rush. It's like any part of the fruit or flower of a plant. There's the sweetness of flowering, the nectar, the beautiful fragrance, and then it cessates because that's what the heart does. It pumps in and out. And it started to show me how through our diets, through our use of medicine, we can use these allocations of medicine to support and remedy ourselves with these very simple understandings of how these qualities are allocated across plants. So with time, I was shown the same principles are true for a human. The spirit is in the sap, which is our blood. Power is in our leaves, which is our hair and nails and tissues and everything that expands out like the leaves do, our fascia. Medicine is in our bark, our skin, our GI tract, anywhere there's a membrane protecting like the bark does, any organ or any skin around or within us, which the GI tract is. It's like an internal skin. Connections in our roots, which is our bones, our ancestry, our foundation, our structure, and love is in our fruit, everything that we give to the world, be it our art, our dance, our medicine, our work, our children. That would be our flower or our fruit. And again, with time, a few months later, the same was shown to be true of the macrocosm of the planet, in that the spirit's in the sap or the blood, which is the waters of the planet. And medicine is in the bark of the planet, which is the skin, which would be the soil, the protective layer. Power is in the leaves of the planet, the hair, the nails of the planet, which on the macrocosm would be the plant kingdom as a whole. Is where the power resides. Connection is in the roots, the ancestry, the bones of the planet, which is the rock, mineral, crystal kingdom. And love is in the fruit and flowers of the planet, the art, the festivity, the children of the planet, which is the animal kingdom as a whole. So the same principles are true from the microcosm. I was showing with time the same is true of a cell. The biomembrane is like the protective skin. The cytoplasm is holding the spirit inside. The mitochondria is generating the power like the leaves, the energy. The DNA holds the roots, the connections, the ancestry, the ancient encoding. And the love is the energy, the ETA that gets gifted to the higher being of the body. So the same principles are true from one cell to the whole of the cosmos. And the tree was teaching me how we can navigate our beings with the allocations of understanding these simple principles and then using herbs and medicines and foods in alignment with this understanding. So then we start adding simple ingredients to simple ingredients. We take those simple understandings of the allocations of medicine across plants and across our cells, and we start combining them with the use of elements. How do we combine it with fire, earth, air, water, ether, pure spirit? So we can take a plant, any plant, even the same plant, and if we make a poultice of it and use it on our skin to heal, that'll have a very different medicine to steaming with it, to wash and cleanse ourselves, to drinking it and infusing the inner body of it, to cutting ourselves and putting that herb directly on so it goes directly into the blood, which is a common practice. It's different to washing with it. It's different to smudging in the smoke of it. So they all have very powerful and different ways. The way we use a plant pulls forth a certain ingredient of that medicine. So for example, smoking, smudging is a very powerful and well-known technique across many cultures. And what this does is that the smoke moves between the two worlds. It's ephemeral. So in moving between the world of matter and spirit, it connects the two worlds as it moves between them. It moves between the liminal spaces. And in so doing, it cleanses all the energies and spirits that are residing there, that are stuck there. It sends them on their way. It like smokes them out. So it cleanses the subtle field around us as it moves through us. And when we have a welcome to country in Australia, we'll stand in the smoke of the leaves. So all the beautiful oils and qualities and medicinal properties in the leaves are coming up in the smoke. And we stand in it and we let it go through the core of our being. We let it go through that tantien where our umbilical connects to the earth. And we let it wash through us and cleanse us deeply and cleanse the energetic properties inside us as well as around us. So it not only cleanses us and refreshes us, it's like walking through a portal. It's like a way of literally welcoming us to country, because now we smell like earth. Now we smell like the plants. And this is a way that the ancestors of the land then can come to recognize us and recognize that we've been welcomed, that we've been accepted by the people of the land. And they can start to engage us more harmoniously, more obviously. They recognize that we've made ourselves available, that we've made a gesture to open and listen and humble and hear them. So using different plants in different ways pulls forward particular flavors of that remedy, whether we eat it and connect with the earth element, drink it and connect with water, take a poultice and absorb it and connect with the fire of it, or absorb it through smoke, or breathe it in, inhale the fragrance and steam with it, or pray with it, the element of ether. All these simple ingredients mixed makes very beautiful and advanced formulae for us to be able to navigate the natural world. So plants are hyper intelligent and they can be adaptogenic as well as we request them to be. So that's why the element of prayer and active connecting with the plant is a major component in working with medicine. I'd even go as far as to say that the active alkaloid in any medicine is friendship, is that alive, awakened, heart-to-heart connection with that plant. So when we acknowledge and engage with the world around us in the way as if it's alive, we find wiser worlds to which to entrain. They're all around us and they're beautifully humble and they're lying in wait. They won't step in and guide us until we ask. So all we need is the simple permission, the simple acknowledgement, the simple gaining strength and gaining confidence to simply say hi, say hello to the world around us and ask it to guide us, and ask the tea that we're drinking to harmonize in our being and communicate not only to us but through us. So we become a worthy vehicle and a worthy vessel for the plant kingdom and medicine to tune in and communicate through us, so that we're eventually doing this work that we're doing and walking the path that we're walking, not only with the plant kingdom, but for the plant kingdom. We're doing this with, for, and through the midwives all around us. So I love this image because this is like us looking into our true mirror and remembering who we really are. It's when we take the simple capacities that are activated by our intent. Like I say, the active alkaloid is simple awareness, it's simple friendship, it's simple acknowledgement that the world around us is alive. Then even without formal initiation, we're deeply empowered to begin listening more closely to the simple wisdoms in all forms all around us. And it's vital at this time that we do so, that we make offerings, that we speak clearly to the world around us, and that we listen to it, that we heed our dreams and call to our ancestors and call for guidance. Because without this level of spirit stewardship, which is the role of humans on the planet, tending the soil and midwifing this and allowing ourselves to also be midwived and tended by beings that can see more than us, like our ancestors, like other gifts and beings in other realms that want to work well with us. Without the spirit stewardship, the immune system of the planet is compromised. Without us tending the soil and allowing ourselves to be tended, the protection layers are down. And then we come into crises and health crises like we find ourselves now. So this simple remembrance and self-activation that we're all empowered to do is really how we're going to start building the immune system of the planet once again. Because the role of humans is largely to tend the soil and keep this ceremonial stewardship on the land, to keep a rhythm of ceremony and offering and harvest and thanksgiving and calling the rain, understanding the rhythms, understanding the seasons, knowing when to do what, and having this very simple, beautiful, rhythmical, harmonic relationship with the cosmos around us. So coming back into ceremony, into true prayer, into clear intent, just speaking truly and directly to the world around us is vitally important in these times. I like to think of what Einstein used to say, that a problem can never be solved in the same state of consciousness that created it. So in coming into political, ecological, economic crises, moving into a ceremonial realm and going into the temple within is a very appropriate way to deal with it. It's in fact the only logical space to come, to hold our own intent and rebuild our immune system from the very inside of this one cell of our being, and then build that capacity in the greater being of the whole culture and planet. So it really is a powerful invitation now. It's a non-negotiable invitation now for us to remember who we are, to listen to our dreams, to let the plants in the garden guide us on how to tend them, and guide us on how to tend ourselves, because they're holding that ancient memory that awakens the ancient memory in ourselves when we allow it. So, you know, when we go through initiation, it activates different gifts. Some people will be a seer, some people would be a herbalist, some people will be a medium, and it activates an element of prophecy. Now, we understand prophecy to be prophetic, to be able to be a soothsayer or a fortune teller, but I don't understand it to be like that. I understand it to be about true seeing. And entering into a state of prophecy is about true seeing, not about prediction. So these now, as we come upon these times that we could safely say are the times of prophecy, are about cultivating this capacity to see and to know clearly and remember who we are and bring our action into alignment with this. And therein lies a profound remedy, gently, gently, if we have any hope as a species, to bring ourselves into this alignment and making use of the beautiful kinship of plant allies and midwives all around us. So I think this brings us close to the end of our time, but I just want to share this, that in harvesting and harnessing the simple ingredients that are all around us all the time, the elements, the plant microbial world, we start to recognize that we are already empowered with these capacities, that we are already the being that can activate such states, and that we are already the midwives that can conduct this. And knowing this simply is the key. So that brings us to the end of our talk. I hope we kept time well, and you could just let me know, Nick, if there's any questions coming through, and we'll spend the rest of the time on that.
Over the years, EGA always has a big mixture of sort of stuff that's really kind of hard data science to really, really esoteric issues. And it's always, I think, a careful balance with those things, because people understand the importance of these spaces. You're sort of talking about a different space, but it's sort of the same space. It's that emotional world versus that material world. But I think that's the as above, so below. These are the two things. They are the same. They reflect each other. But our personal understanding of that might be, you know, we don't. It's different. Different people are along different paths. So I think, thank you for your talk and talking about the need for initiation, and for that kind of that aspect in our culture, because I think that's something that can really be ungrounding when you don't have those points in time to do that. And I think the strongest cultures are those that have those things really down pat.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think we have a real crisis whereby a lot of our would-be healers are in mental institutions because we don't know how to interpret what they're experiencing. So it's going back to your question about language, it's saying the same thing in many different octaves. So we can speak, for example, take the cedar teachings and the allocations of medicine that the tree told me. I verify that biologically and scientifically. And you can also speak about it metaphorically and energetically and therapeutically. And you can speak about it through the level of symbolism, or you can speak about it through the level of prayer. You can speak about it on all these different octaves, but essentially it's the same thing. So we come from a culture that hasn't cultivated the language for the opening of our being. And thereby we're facing a crisis. And I feel like it's valuable to address that, because in acknowledging it, we know where we are. And once we know where we are, we can start to walk forward. We can't go forward without acknowledging where we're at.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Does
If
that
you do
address?
have any questions, do drop them in the YouTube chat. Um, uh, um, I, okay, there's something that I'm curious about. It's a bit of a murky topic. It's a topic I don't get to much because of difficulties surrounding it. But let's talk about. There's a funny thing with prohibition. It sort of says you're never allowed to do this thing, and we all know that people are going to at different kinds of ages where they'll experiment with a substance, a plant, whatever they happen to experiment with, but because of prohibition, we don't have the mechanisms and the ability to share that knowledge. It's like a block on that knowledge. You're not allowed to talk about those things. And a particularly taboo topic is parenting. If you're a parent, or you know a parent who happens to be also somebody who uses psychedelics from time to time, how do you introduce that topic to your children? And is there a role of initiation in there? And I know, a bit of a murky topic, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, look, I believe just being open and so in an appropriate context. So there's one mode of parenting that says your child is ready to know something when they ask about it. Now, I'm not a parent, so I can't speak from experience. I have beautiful nieces and nephews, but I'm not talking from experience of parenting. But I believe in respecting the being of an individual, and when they are curious about something means their being is thirsty and ready to have that response. I think it's a symptom of an unhealthy culture to not be able to speak about certain things that for millennia have been our medicine. So it's not really, when we take a step back and we look at the greater context of what's going on, it's not really substances that are illegal. It's the state of consciousness that they take us into that are illegal. So we are being imprisoned in a certain state of consciousness.
And
And that's the part that's really.
on that, because I think this is one of those times where I've found to listen with more ears, I guess, because sometimes people are like, oh, that's a bit airy-fairy for me. Here's the as above, so below of this. In Victoria, there's a certain kind of magic that gets used in the world that's called the law. It's written on paper, and they will come and do things to you if it goes against what that paper says. In 2017 in Victoria and across many other parts of the world, there was a blanket ban on psychoactive substances. Anything that was considered to have psychoactive properties, which was defined as having significant effect on your on basically your sensory input. So this is where lawyers go, ooh, what is significant? But it's kind of this silly question, because now the definition of what is illegal is having an altered mind state. So having an altered, it's not the drug, it's not a potential for harm of the drug, it is altering your consciousness that is illegal. And this sort of slipped past, and that's what's happened. So that's, I guess, as above, so below. It is literally there in the law. I think the people that make these laws don't necessarily understand it, but that's, this is what we end up with. A bunch of magicians that don't know they're playing with magic.
Right. Or if you want to get even deeper into it, perhaps they do know that they're playing with magic at some level.
Well,
but that is a topic. Well, not quite in those terms, but it's certainly a very powerful form of sorcery law. So it's a very interesting topic, because first of all, you're not allowed to alter your consciousness. Alter it from what? What is default consciousness? And then in that definition, wouldn't dreaming be illegal? Because dreaming is highly psychedelic. Wouldn't breathing in certain ways, like meditation or holotropic breathwork, they radically alter our consciousness? They would fit into that definition as well. Eating rice, eating anything that we put into our body radically alters our consciousness. So that's my curiosity. Like, you're not allowed to alter your consciousness from what? What are you saying is default consciousness? Because that's what would be question.
And then I think the sort of dark flip side of that is the fact that our whole world is built on people trying to take advantage of how they know your mind works so they can extract value from you. So if the whole goal of marketing and advertising is not to communicate the usefulness of a product to you, that would be too utilitarian. It's not going to appeal to your emotions and get you to buy. That stuff is tricks. You're being tricked. You're being, these things are done to trick you. So
Right. Right. I mean, our most valuable asset, our most valuable resource is our attention.
mm,
There's a huge attention harvest that's the entire reason behind technology, to harvest our attention all the time. So that makes us curious and makes us wonder why. And I'll tell you why, because our attention is so very powerful that wherever it gets channeled or shepherded, a lot of energy goes behind it. So we are extremely powerful in who we are and where we put our attention. It's almost like maybe this is esoteric language, but we are dream builders. We build worlds with our attention. So
I
wherever
I think we need to talk.
what's the saying? Wherever energy goes, wherever attention goes, energy flows. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I think we
we
need to
we
talk
build
more.
worlds with our attention.
Sorry. We
We
need
need
to
to talk
talk
more.
more in those esoteric terms, and people need to hear it more because I think people have been almost clouded by the illusion of materiality, of a materialism that's inanimate, that's not connected to everything else, that's not constantly
Yeah,
moving,
yeah,
and then people go,
absolutely.
they're looking for the quantified response, but they're forgetting that they do emotional things every day, respond to their environment in ways that don't necessarily make sense. I think that's the.
Yeah, we need to start to validate the different ways of getting knowledge. There's many epistemological channels, there's many ways of gaining valid knowledge. And up till very recently, just a few generations ago, even our grandparents would not be surprised by getting information from a plant where their hands were in the soil, or taking really valid and reliable information from dreams. So it's only recently that we've been culling and limiting the realm from which we get valid information. And when I speak to people, I'm actually finding more and more that people are thirsty for this kind of knowledge, acknowledging the different parts of our being, acknowledging that we are emotional, energetic, sensitive, vulnerable beings, acknowledging that we have these visionary capacities, and that dreams and things we see in a drum journey, or a um, plant journey, or a breath work, are highly valid. So I'm beginning to feel more and more confident in speaking the language that my heart wants to speak, because I'm really noticing people are thirsty for our beings being acknowledged in their fullness. We are not categorized beings. And the parts of our beings, the levels of our beings, want to align and connect with each other.
In the YouTube comments, Monkey Magic has just referred back to talking about technology to capture our attention. Well, this sort of goes back to what we were talking about before. What is the normal state of consciousness that you're not meant to alter it from? And talking about these technologies, because they are altering your consciousness. The whole point of these things is to alter your consciousness, to influence your decision making process, to make you more likely make a decision that's going to benefit them. So that's the whole point of this game. It's a energy transference in terms of, if now I want to buy that thing instead of that thing, then my energy, I have to go out and work to get the money, and then that money I'm paying. That whole process is siphoned through their desires or their push. That's
Right.
altering consciousness. That is the way our world works. But like I said, here in Victoria, we've just had, and in many other parts of the world, we just had this new addition to prohibition, which says altering any plant or substance that significantly alters your consciousness. I'll have to bring up the exact text because
Clearly,
it's
because
legalese.
now, I mean, as does water, as does spinach, as does potatoes. It all alters our consciousness. We are
Um,
what we eat, and whatever we eat will give rise to a caliber of consciousness.
And one final question here, just on a slight tangent. But do you know anything? What? Okay. Oh, there we go. Sorry, from Joseph, asking about, do you know of any psychedelic plant use in Indigenous Australian culture? I saw this question pop up a little bit earlier as well. Do you know? That's from Joseph.
I would imagine there's plenty. I know of a couple. I also know that Australian law and culture is really beautifully protective. So I don't feel like I'm in a position to speak on it because I'm not a Hidachi or a medicine person or Nankari of this land. But there are many plants, of course, because it's what we've been using for millennia in order to keep ourselves well. There are herbs and plants that heal the body. There are herbs that heal the heart. There are herbs that heal the mind, and there are herbs that heal the spirit. And other cultures does not have this very weird ban on certain herbs. You know, in fact, for us, even the ones that heal the body are under oppression because they compete with the pharmaceuticals. So there's plenty. I mean, all herbs are medicinal in their being, whether they're medicinal in being nutritional or medicinal in being psychoactive. But there's certainly plants that expand the consciousness that Kodachi and medicine people would use in order to see deeper into the diagnosis of their client, and then use those to bring about harmonizing the being and bring the spirit back into that being. Or, you know, they speak in very, as little as I know, in very beautiful and simple terms about sorry business and having a broken heart and healing the spirit. It's all very simple words. And then they've got the plants that help with that and soothe that and console and comfort and nourish, and then start to give energy and give strength and allow us to see more clearly and connect us with our ancestry. All plants work on at least two levels, physiological and energetic. So one plant that might be good for healing bones, say for example in the Amazon Shiriksanango, the it's a literally means cold medicine, and it takes cold out the bone, so it's great for healing arthritis and any kind of joint problem. It's also good for connecting on a higher level, so it lets us see more clearly in the dream realm and see a little bit into the future. So that same connection of the bones and the earth medicine is happening in the level of the spirit as well. So all plants have this energetic and physiological harmony or octave on which they work. They're like us. They have many levels of their being. They're intelligent, awake beings, and they'll be medicinal, especially when we ask them to.
Lila Lieberman, thanks very much for presenting this afternoon and
Thank you
joining
so
us
much
live.
for the invitation. Excellent. Great to be with you. Have a good rest of the conference.
Thank you. And one of the things that we were just touching on with Lila is that it is, I guess, important to recognise that people are getting, there's some comments there. People saying there's quite a lot of secrecy around what might be going on and what knowledge is there, but really think about what the colonial legacy has done to Indigenous peoples here in Australia, but all around the world. It's the same thing, and it goes back to this thing that we're talking about altering consciousness and about this, ban on altering consciousness when, as Lila says, we're kind of, everything is altering our consciousness in mildly different ways, some in drastic different ways. And there's plenty of just experiences in life that you can have that are altered states, are an altered state of consciousness. You experience all kinds of different states of consciousness. So this kind of idea that you can control it and is I think part of the colonial legacy that we've spread across the world, in saying, no, this is the reality that is, and you must accept it, and we're going to trash everything else. There's yeah.
If I could speak briefly to that, I would say I would choose to use the word care more than secrecy. There is a reason that these plants are protected, because there is a sacred order in which we open, which I discussed. So if somebody is not yet gone through the rites of passage of humbling, of knowing their place in things, of knowing how certain things work, it's dangerous to activate them with plants that are more empowering and give you certain powers, because then you're acting with an intention that's not on the highest behalf of all beings. So it's more care than secrecy. It's not hiding for hiding's sake. It's hiding for wisdom's sake. It's hiding for care for the one who's receiving the plant, so that they're in an appropriate readiness to receive this knowledge and power and care for those around, because someone with a stick or a sword who doesn't know how to yield it can do great damage.
Thank you very much, Leela.